Imagine standing in a grand hall surrounded by history and tradition. The man at the center, the king, has waited his whole life for this moment, but now his body is failing him, his hands tremble, his voice fades, and his son, the future king, must make a choice that will break his heart. This is a story about that choice, about the moment a silver pen dropped on a table and changed everything. Everyone is talking about the announcement, the big dramatic moment where Prince William steps up and confirms his father is stepping back. But the part that actually made me pause, the detail that changes the entire story, is what supposedly happened before any cameras were on. We are talking about a private meeting at Windsor after a rehearsal. A silver pen dropped on a table. That is it, that is the moment. A pen hitting wood, and suddenly the entire future of the British monarchy pivots. If that story is true, and this is where it gets weird, then the palace was not managing a transition. They were managing a secret that had already collapsed in a closed room. And honestly, the fact that they will not just answer the question about the timeline is the strangest part of all. So William finally breaks his silence, and the words do not sound like the usual palace speak we are used to. You know what I mean, that very polished, very careful language that says a lot without actually saying anything. This was not that. This sounded like surrender, like grief, like history shifting in real time while everyone just had to sit there and listen. The detail that keeps sticking with me is that William apparently rewrote the statement himself. He took the softer, gentler draft that was meant to protect Charles from the full force of finality and just changed it, made it direct enough to survive the shock. That is not a son following protocol. That is a son deciding that honesty is the only thing left, even if it breaks everyone in the room. Charles, meanwhile, is listening from a private room. His hand is resting on the arm of his chair. His face is still, but his world is already changing. I keep thinking about that image. A man who waited his entire life to wear the crown, and now the crown is being lifted from his shoulders while he is still there to feel its absence. That is a specific kind of cruelty. He is not being defeated by scandal or rebellion or public anger. He's being forced back by his own body. And somewhere beyond the controlled words of the address, he hears his son choosing truth over comfort. That had to land in a way that no official document could ever capture. Camilla felt the difference immediately. She had heard soft versions before, careful phrases, gentler drafts, but William had rejected the shorter palace statement because he knew soft language would only delay the reckoning. And when the sentence landed, when the word permanent stopped being something everyone danced around, Camilla did not speak. Stepping back did not sound temporary inside those walls. It sounded like goodbye wearing formal clothes. Catherine was waiting beyond the doorway as the address ended, already aware that this was only the first blow. William rose slowly, but he did not look relieved. He looked changed. And before anyone could fully process what he had just done, the people closest to Charles had to face what this exit would cost them personally. Every royal crisis has a public face, but the first wounds are always private. Behind the announcement stood a father, a son, a wife, and a future queen forced into roles none of them had asked to play so suddenly. Charles was not only a king stepping away. William was not only an heir stepping forward. Camilla and Catherine were watching the family structure change in real time, and there is no protocol for that. There is no training that prepares you to watch someone you love be gently moved away from the power they waited a lifetime to hold. So the family meets privately. Charles enters late and the room changes before he says a word. He pauses beside the empty chair at the head of the table, the place that had always belonged to command, certainty, and royal control. He looks toward William, and for one quiet second, everyone understands what no statement could soften. The transfer had already begun. This meeting was not about a single public appearance or a temporary pause. It was about the daily life of the monarchy being reshaped while the man at its center was still breathing, still aware, and still wounded by the truth. William stood still, but he looked older than he had that morning. He had been trained since youth to carry destiny, yet no training could prepare him to inherit responsibility while his father was still alive and suffering. An heir means the person next in line to the throne, but in that room, that title no longer felt like a distant promise. It felt like a burden being placed directly into his hands. Charles saw that burden on his son's face, and he did not look proud first, he looked sorry. Camilla felt the announcement like a personal loss. She had protected Charles through storms that would have broken weaker people, and now she was watching him be moved aside while he still had the heart to serve. She kept her voice low, but her silence had weight. She knew the monarchy needed order, yet she also knew order could be cruel when it arrived too quickly. Catherine noticed that pain. She also noticed William's hands steady in front of the family but tense when no one else was watching. That is such a telling detail to me. The public sees the steady hands. The family sees the tension when the room empties. William finally spoke and the room tightened. He quietly asked that the family stop pretending the situation was temporary. The words were simple, but they struck like a command. Catherine looked toward him with quiet concern because she knew that saying the truth inside the family was harder than saying it to the world. Camilla looked at Charles, waiting for him to push back to soften it to reclaim the room. Charles did not push back. He stepped closer to the chair, then stopped again. When he spoke, he did not sound like a monarch guarding power. He sounded like a father asking his son to protect what he could no longer hold alone. And yet this painful family scene did not appear from nowhere. One hidden moment had pushed the palace past the point of denial. Long before William's statement reached the world, one private moment inside the palace made silence impossible. It was not a rumor, not a whisper, not a vague medical update passed through aides. It was a single incident that forced everyone to stop pretending time was on their side. From that night forward, every smile, every schedule change, every palace delay carried a darker meaning. Charles had been trying to preserve the rhythm of duty, even as duty began taking more from him than he could give. He still wanted the papers brought in, still wanted the briefings kept short but steady, still wanted the monarchy to feel unshaken. The palace had reduced engagements and spaced out appearances because stability mattered. If the public saw weakness too early, the whole nation would begin asking whether the reign itself was already slipping away. William saw what the polished schedule tried to hide. He watched Charles save his energy between appearances, lower his voice during longer discussions, and pause before simple decisions that once came easily. Senior courtiers kept calling it manageable, but William had seen his father struggle in private, and that made every careful phrase feel like a lie. Camilla resisted the darker language too. She feared that if the palace admitted permanence, Charles would not only lose duties, he would feel the crown leaving him while he still had the heart to serve. Then came the private Windsor briefing after the Commonwealth Service rehearsal. The rehearsal was meant to be controlled, ordinary, almost routine, but nothing about that night stayed ordinary. Charles began speaking, then stopped. His hand tightened around a silver pen. He tried to continue, tried to push through the silence, but his voice failed in the middle of the sentence. The pen dropped against the table with a sharp sound, and no one in that room forgot it. Camilla moved first, but William understood first. The king was escorted out by medical staff, and the prince did not follow immediately. He stayed behind, staring at the empty chair, knowing the palace had crossed into territory no courtier could manage with softer wording. Later, William received a sealed medical summary, a private document giving the doctor's final view in plain terms. It confirmed the illness could not be reversed, only managed for comfort and time. William read it once, then again. Charles's future had been reduced to careful pages, and the prince's patience broke. Camilla wanted protection. The courtiers wanted delay. But William decided the family had to hear the truth directly, even if it broke them. Once he had seen that moment, he could no longer remain the obedient heir, waiting quietly in the background. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with silence. William entered the room not as a rebel, not as a rival, but as a son carrying the unbearable truth everyone else was trying to soften. Charles knew why he had come. The king had spent a lifetime mastering duty, but now duty had taken on a cruel new shape, letting his heir say what he could not. William asked for a private audience without aides, secretaries, or medical advisors present. That mattered because no one could hide behind palace language in that room. No one could turn pain into a schedule note. The prince knew this meeting would become the emotional center of the entire crisis, because the public statement could only happen after Charles heard the truth from his own son first. Charles sat across from William and removed his glasses. He placed them beside the unsigned statement slowly, carefully, as if that small act carried the weight of a reign. The king wanted dignity. He wanted control over his exit. He wanted the monarchy to see him step back with order, not be pushed aside by illness. William wanted something harsher but cleaner. He wanted honesty before the crown lost public trust. William's voice nearly broke when he told his father that protecting the crown could no longer mean hiding the pain. The prince had already rewritten the palace statement himself, changing the soft words into something direct enough to survive the shock. He revealed this through the draft placed between them, a documented account marked with his own corrections. Charles looked down at those changes and understood immediately his son had stopped waiting for permission to be strong. Charles admitted the truth then, and it cut deeper than any official line. He had hoped to continue longer, not because he feared death, but because he feared leaving William alone with a burden. The king had spent decades being prepared for duty, yet nothing prepared him for watching his son become the shield before he was ready to let go. William heard the fear beneath the calm, and for a moment the future king was not angry anymore. He was heartbroken. Charles finally nodded, but that nod was not simple permission. It was surrender. He pushed the unsigned statement slightly toward William and said, "Then say it as my son, not as my spokesman." The prince did not answer quickly. He understood what had just been given to him. With that quiet permission, the struggle moved beyond father and son into the hidden machinery of royal power. No royal exit happens with one statement. Behind Williams, the palace machinery began to turn with ruthless precision. Red boxes were redirected. Private audiences were rearranged. Certain names rose higher on call sheets while others vanished without ceremony. Yet inside this cold system, one human truth remained. Charles was still alive, still aware, and still watching his authority pass into other hands. William understood the change before anyone dared to describe it plainly. The prince now held practical control over daily royal leadership, meaning the briefings, schedules, emergency decisions, and official responses that keep the monarchy moving each day. That mattered because Charles was not only reducing appearances, he was releasing the working center of the crown while still living inside its shadow. Red boxes, the locked cases carrying official papers for royal review, began moving first through William's office before anything reached the king. One senior private secretary confirmed the shift in a documented household note, and the words landed like a quiet earthquake. Catherine became essential almost immediately. She stood beside William not as decoration but as balance because the family image needed calm while the inner structure changed. The future queen knew that every public smile would now carry a hidden message. The monarchy was steady even if the family behind it was hurting. William leaned on her more than he said aloud, and Catherine saw the cost at his face when the room emptied. He was gaining authority, but the gain felt nothing like victory. Camilla struggled with every new instruction. A duty once attached to Charles's household moved to the prince's team, then another, then another. The queen consort discovered the transfers through a revised call sheet, a daily palace list showing who handles meetings, duties, and official contact. She read it twice, and the silence around her hardened. To others, it was procedure. To her, it felt like the life she had built around the king was being carefully taken apart. Charles asked to review one final set of papers, and the room fell still. No one wanted to deny him. No one wanted to admit why the request hurt. The king signed a final authorization, set the pen down slowly, and looked toward the door as William's aide carried the folder away. He did not protest. He did not call it back, but everyone saw his eyes follow it. William knew that look would stay with him. Catherine knew it too. Camilla felt it like a closing chapter. The new structure might protect the monarchy, but protection had a price. And by the time the paperwork left that room, the emotional fallout had already begun spreading through the palace corridors. The first collapse was not public. It happened after the doors closed, after the aides stepped back, after the language of duty had done its damage. Camilla had stood beside Charles through decades of judgment, loyalty, scandal, and survival. But this new reality was different. The crown was not rejecting her. It was moving past the life she had built around him. Camilla sat alone after the meeting, her hand resting near Charles's untouched teacup, while the sound of a closing door echoed down the corridor. She did not look angry. She looked stranded. The announcement had reshaped more than the king's reign. It had reshaped her place within the royal structure because Charles was no longer only reducing public duties. He was being separated from the daily authority that had once made every room turn toward him. Charles noticed her silence before anyone else did. The king had seen Camilla survive judgment, whispers, and cold rooms, but the silence felt different. She had fought to keep him steady, and now his exit had wounded her in a place no apology could reach. He wanted to tell her that William was doing what had to be done. He wanted to tell her that the monarchy needed order, but Charles also knew that order could sound cruel when it arrived through closed doors and transferred papers. Camilla privately asked one senior aide whether William's new authority meant Charles would still be consulted. The answer came through a documented household briefing, careful and polished but devastating beneath the surface. The king would be respected. The king would be informed, yet the daily direction would move through the prince first. Camilla heard every softened word for what it truly meant. Her husband would remain loved but no longer central. Catherine found Camilla later, still alone, still holding herself together with painful control. The future queen did not offer empty comfort because she understood that love could not stop institutional change. Catherine knew William was acting to protect the monarchy, but she also saw what that protection was costing the woman across from her. Camilla looked at her once, and that look carried no rivalry, only grief. Charles felt that grief reaching him even before she spoke again. William felt it too, though the prince could not slow the transition. Now the crown was moving because it had to move, but sorrow was gathering in the spaces between duty and family. And grief did not stop the crown from moving. It forced William and Charles into one final private understanding. After the arguments, statements, and signatures, the real turning point came in a room with no officials present. No courtier took notes. No secretary waited outside with a folder. It was only Charles and William, father and son, stripped of titles for one rare moment. The monarchy had demanded strength from both men. Now it demanded something harder: trust. William visited Charles privately after the announcement, but not to discuss schedules, papers, or the next public duty. The prince came because necessity had left a wound between them, and no palace statement could heal it. Charles looked at William and saw the cost before his son said a word. The king had heard the public statement, heard the careful strength, heard the pain hidden beneath the control. He knew William had done what duty required. Yet he also knew duty had made his son feel like a betrayer. The prince admitted it quietly. Speaking about his father's illness to the world had felt like betrayal, even when every word was true. Charles did not interrupt him. He let the confession stand between them. William knelt beside Charles's chair and took his father's hand. For the first time that day, neither man spoke like a king. The prince was no longer trying to sound steady. Charles was no longer trying to sound unchanged. The king told him the pain had not come from hearing the statement. The pain came from realizing his son had become strong enough to say it. That truth broke something open between them, not anger, not resentment, something softer, something far more final. Charles gave William one instruction, and it carried more weight than any signed paper. He told him to protect the family before protecting the institution, because the crown without humanity becomes hollow. William promised his father something no aide could record. He promised Charles would not be hidden away, forgotten, or reduced to a footnote while the monarchy moved forward. The king would be honored, included, and seen. Charles held his son's hand a little tighter, and William understood that this was not simply permission, it was trust. While that private promise settled between father and son, the world outside the palace was already turning their pain into history. By morning, the announcement was no longer contained by palace walls. It belonged to the nation, the newspapers, the broadcasters, the crowds, and every person who had watched Charles wait a lifetime only to see his reign wounded by illness. The private sorrow of one family became a public reckoning. Britain did not simply hear that a king was stepping back, it watched an era begin to close. William stood beside Catherine as the first reaction came in, and the prince did not celebrate the support. He absorbed it like a man carrying both gratitude and grief. The palace released a formal schedule confirming he would assume a larger leadership role immediately while Charles withdrew from active duties. That mattered because this was no longer emotion alone. It was structure. It was proof that the monarchy had already begun adjusting around the king's illness. Catherine watched William read the messages, and she understood what the public sympathy truly meant. People were grieving for Charles, but that grief came with pressure on her family. The future queen knew every calm appearance from now on would be judged as a sign of stability. Every tired expression would be studied. Every absence would carry meaning. William paused over one handwritten note from a child thanking the king for trying so hard, and the words hit him harder than the headlines. The prince read it twice, then lowered the paper without speaking. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public mood gathered into one unforgettable moment. A quiet crowd stood at the gates while one newspaper front page read, "The King steps back, William speaks for the crown." A woman placed a single white rose against the railing, and strangers nearby fell silent as the headline appeared across their phones. No one needed to explain what had changed. Everyone could feel it. A major broadcaster framed the announcement as the most emotionally significant royal transition since the late Queen's final years. That comparison mattered because it turned Charles's personal pain into national memory. His exit was no longer just a medical crisis inside one family. It was a moment where the public had to watch continuity survive through sorrow. William knew the world was not waiting for perfection. It was waiting for meaning. Catherine stayed close, but the prince carried the next words alone. The public had seen the shock, but William's final message would decide whether this moment felt like collapse or continuity. In the end, the story was not only about illness. It was about a king who had to release power, a son who had to accept it, and a family forced to turn private heartbreak into public duty. William's silence had protected Charles for as long as silence could protect him. When that silence finally broke, it did not destroy the monarchy. It revealed its cost. William delivered his final message through a recorded palace address, and this time his voice carried no attempt to disguise the pain. The prince made clear that Charles's exit was not a disappearance. It was a dignified withdrawal shaped by illness, love, and necessity. That mattered because the monarchy could only survive the shock if the public saw truth instead of empty phrases. It also mattered because Charles deserved to be seen as a man making a brave choice, not a ruler being erased. Charles accepted the truth with the quiet strength that had defined the hardest days of his reign. The king knew his time at the center would be remembered, not for length but for courage. He had waited decades for the crown, yet his body could no longer carry its daily weight. That pain could have turned bitter. Instead, the monarch allowed his son to step forward not as a rival, but as the person he had already chosen in silence before the announcement ever reached the world. William stood beside Charles one final time before the family, not replacing him, not overshadowing him, but steadying the crown as his father let it rest. The prince understood then that becoming the central royal figure meant losing the last illusion that he still had time. Catherine watched him with quiet pride, and she also saw the grief beneath his control. Camilla stood close to Charles, changed by the crisis but no longer fighting the truth. The queen consort had felt the pain of transition, yet she chose unity over resentment. Catherine left that room knowing the family had survived because honesty had done what secrecy could not. Camilla left knowing love still had a place even when power moved on. William left knowing duty had finally become personal in a way he could never undo. Charles remained king, but his active reign had reached its emotional end. There was no unresolved mystery left. This moment marked the beginning of William's real guardianship of the monarchy, not through triumph but through sorrow, duty, and love. The monarchy changed forever because one son finally found the courage to tell the truth.